The situation was yesterday, apparently this young child was pulled from a pool. The mother knew how to perform resuscitation, and resuscitation was commenced immediately. Another member of the family got in contact with the ambulance via the AAO network.
A basic knowledge of resuscitation techniques made the world of difference in this case, as it did for 3-year-old Jared Stewart, whose mother dragged him from a family pool at Lake Macquarie just before Christmas. Jared was blue and not breathing when pulled from the water. NBN Television and the New South Wales Ambulance Service launched Operation Restart late last year, encouraging people to learn life-saving skills. At the very least, resuscitation charts are readily available at ambulance stations.
It's something we can all do if we've just got that little bit of knowledge.
Well, Andrew, that was proven just prior to Christmas with the NBN Project Restart video that was shown on television. We had a Saturday around all the ambulance stations in northern New South Wales, and 8,000 people who never knew CPR were trained on that one day with an hour's lesson. So what we're saying to people is contact the ambulance service, the Red Cross, the Life Saving Society, or whoever, the St John's Ambulance, and get out and do a CPR class, and you may save someone's life.
Before the coroner's court today was Meryl Jorgensen, the mother of Alison Parker. During the last 2 days, there has been conflicting evidence given to the court as to whether Miss Parker was with Alison Newstead the night she disappeared. Mrs Jorgensen told the court she's certain her daughter was in bed at around 10 o'clock on the night of the 6th of October. She later admitted under cross-examination by Sergeant Phil Lloyd she couldn't be sure if it was the night in question. Counsel for the Newstead family, Peter Cleaves, asked her if she knew her 17-year-old daughter had been underage drinking in licensed premises and had been having an affair with an engaged man, Michael Self. Mrs Jorgensen replied to both questions, yes, I'd warned her about it. Mr Cleaves also asked Mrs Jorgensen if she knew her daughter had been using speed at the age of 15 and supplying cannabis to other people. Mrs Jorgensen told the court, I have found out, like every other parent in Cessnock. Toward the end of his cross-examination, Lloyd asked Mrs Jorgensen whether she would reflect on her evidence if it was possible for the state to grant indemnity to her daughter Alison Parker. Mrs Jorgensen was asked to go home and discuss the offer with Alison. Both will appear in court at a later date. Also presented to the court the results of toxicology tests. An alcohol level of 0.11 was detected and unconfirmed traces of cannabis were found in Miss Newstead's body. Dr Andrew Dawson, director of Newcastle's toxicology unit, told the court that if cigarettes, cannabis and alcohol were mixed with asthma medication, a life-threatening reaction may have occurred. This would have been exacerbated if amphetamines were also taken, but so far tests have not revealed the presence of amphetamines. For Alison's family, there's still no definite answers as to what happened to their daughter in October last year. Her naked body was found dumped on the outskirts of Cessnock 6 days after she disappeared. The inquest continues tomorrow. Since Monday, the Newstead family has sat in on proceedings in the Cessnock Coroner's Court. Today, Alan Newstead was called to the stand. He read out a statement written on behalf of his family. Mr Newstead described his daughter as a good moral young woman who had many friends who she was always willing to do a good turn for. Mr Newstead went on to say, "We feel in our hearts that a trusted friend or friends have betrayed that trust to commit a very sinister act." Throughout the inquest, Coroner Darryl Farrell Field has heard that amphetamines could possibly have been involved in Alison's death. Mr Newstead told the court, "We believe that if somebody, knowing the effects of substances on an uninformed person leading to that person's death, then a manslaughter charge could be contemplated, and if it were premeditated, then possibly murder." Mr Newstead ended his statement by saying, "Alison was deprived of her dignity by a person or persons, leaving her naked body to the elements and nature in a very cruel way, and those circumstances are possibly something that we will never be able to come to terms with." Alison's body was found hidden under sheets of corrugated iron near Cessnock on October 13 last year, 6 days after she disappeared. The inquest will resume tomorrow when one more witness is likely to be called. It will then be adjourned until after Michael Self and Roderick Rankin have appeared in court on drug charges. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
This young fan wasn't the only one glad to see Terry Dozier back in town. Falcons management and Terry's family spent an anxious few weeks trying for clearance with the Australian government for him to come back and play.
We really wanted to get here, and it just seemed like when we got one thing done, there was something else to do, and it got real frustrating at times. And all I had to do was just get down on my knees and pray that we can get this thing resolved and get over here.
Coach Tom Wisman wasted no time reinstating the title of captain on Dozier, who was keen to get on court and mix it with the Falcons' off-season buys. But there's another small hitch. Dozier injured his knees training in the States and will need intensive physio before he's right to get back on court.
I played with some terrible injuries with my back, and I can bounce back from this one too.
Assistant coach Dave Ankeny also joined the team full-time today, leaving his job as a PE teacher to work with the Falcons every day. The Falcons' first trial game will be against the Sydney Slammers in Liverpool in 2 weeks.
KFC has been in Singleton for years. There are already at least a dozen other takeaway food outlets, and now the golden arches of McDonald's want to come to town.
I think it'd be choice.
It'd be excellent. I think it'd be really good and they get a lot of business.
The kids may be happy, but the local P&C isn't. You see, McDonald's wants to set up on this site just 200 metres from the high school.
A major concern would have to be the loss of income to our P&C's canteen.
The canteen made a $36,000 profit last year, money that gets ploughed back into the school. It's not that the P&C is opposed to McDonald's, it's not. Buyer says she just doesn't want it on her patch.
We can see that it would bring good opportunities for employment for our children. We also see that it's another form of entertainment that country towns are always looking for. So we would encourage McDonald's in the town, but we just don't want it quite so close.
The school itself also wants McDonald's, but somewhere else in town. A spokesperson for the fast food chain was not available for comment. Should the students get finger buns or French fries, baked beans or Big Macs? Singleton Council decides on Monday night. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
The tanker was following a traffic detour when it came to grief on the Richardson and Madawi Roads roundabout. The driver, who wasn't injured when his rig crashed onto its side, attempted to plug the leaking tank.
We believe it's carrying somewhere in excess of 30,000 litres of super fuel. The front tank, or the tank just behind the driver's compartment, has ruptured at ground level, and approximately 7,500 litres of fuel has spilled out onto the surrounding area.
A sand haulage contractor was first on the scene. Quick thinking saw a load dumped onto the road to dam the spill. Firefighters from the Williamtown RAAF base rushed to the scene with a foam spraying unit. They were joined by volunteers and regulars. One man who was soaked in fuel was treated by ambulance officers as crews worked to halt the spill before it seeped into the water table.
Within 500 metres of that accident is one of our bore points where we extract water for human consumption.
Petrol fumes hung heavily in the air as the remainder of the load was pumped into a tanker.
There's always a chance that gets away, and as you can smell the vapours, but the mixture at this stage is probably too lean.
A month ago, the same area was rimmed by fires at the height of the bushfire emergency.
Could have been a very different story a month ago, or even a different roundabout in the Port Stephens Shire. This one, luckily, is not surrounded by any buildings or property.
Repair work on Nelson Bay Road had to be put on hold to allow traffic to be diverted around the scene. The tanker was righted late this afternoon, but the intersection will remain closed until a full damage assessment has been carried out. Andrew Lobb, NBN News. The committee opted for a showboat-style function to launch its information package on this year's Newcastle show. Guests were greeted with a taste of things to come. Free street entertainment, which will be a feature around the showground from the 2nd to the 5th of March. Inside at an official luncheon on board the South Stain floating restaurant, show president Peter Robinson spoke of the variety on offer at the show.
I guess you hear the old story each year, it's going to be bigger and better, but I can assure you that the amount of free entertainment that we are providing this year is double than what it was last year.
The committee says it's attempting to cram value into showgoers' dollars. What sort of ticket prices are people looking at this year?
Well, it's the same as last year. It's $10 adult and $5 for children and pensioners.
A familiar sight? Highly unlikely. This was the technique English bodgers used 800 years ago to make furniture, primarily chair components, on a pole lathe. Now, your next question may be, what is a bodger? Well, a bodger is a craftsman who used a pole lathe, like this one, to make furniture components.
They were itinerant workers, farm workers, who apparently worked on the farms in the summertime, and during the winter time they went and became wood turners. They would often buy a stand of trees from the farmer and would set up their workshop in the woods and then set about making chair components.
Daryl, an antique dealer, has travelled to England several times to learn the age-old craft. The components turned, largely used to make a type of chair called the Windsor chair. The process starts with the green wood being cut along the grain. It's then trimmed and shaved to a desired shape. The wood is then turned on a pole lathe. Bodgers then steam the wood, bending it to shape the chair. This suppleness and strength unmatched by modern technique.
That shape is some Windsor chairs that I've seen in collections that are 250, nearly 300 years old, which are still intact today and showing no signs of stress. And if you use sawn timber, it just won't do it. It just breaks out.
Daryl and partner Howard Archibald are now wanting to pass on their skills, not just to maintain an age-old craft, but share a possible therapy.
A fantastic relaxation. It's like working, compared to working seasoned timber, working green timber on the pole is like working cheese.
The pair will be displaying bodging during the Antiques and Collectibles Fair at Morpeth this weekend. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
The Chief didn't look in too much pain with knee problems today. In fact, he was all smiles for the team photo. But he's out of tomorrow night's clash with Balmain, the coach not wanting to risk him. The forwards have a 1992 look about them, Marquette and Mullane back in the second row. Smith and Wire are getting a chance in the backs. Former fullback Brad Godden is in the centres.
I think the very interesting clash is Bradley Godden and Tim Brasher, two World Cup fullbacks now playing in the centres for their club. It probably tells us that the fullback position in Australia is not cut and dried.
Another interesting clash, Robbie McCormack and Benny Elias. It will be a tough battle against the Tigers with new coach Junior Pearce out to prove a point. Coach Waite is keen to win the money, but it is still pre-season football.
You're not going to put every card on the table in the first game, but the object is to win. If we have to play 4 aces, will you play 4 aces?
One ace on display today, former South Sydney player Neil Baker. He's helping out Knights Jason Martin and Matthew Rodwell with their kicking games.
It's a who's who of bowls. Many of the country's top players are in Newcastle for the inaugural Alder Park Premier Pairs. Among the 7 current and former internationals playing is Kahaiba's Sam Lagutsa, gold medalist at the Pacific titles in Canada last year, and Sydney's John Stewart, the current state pairs champion. For the past 3 days, 112 teams from across New South Wales have been playing 3 games a day. The top 6 pairs from each day will go into tomorrow's final. Competition has proved intense, with some of the internationals not making the grade.
Dennis Dalton, Rex Johnson and our own Darby Ross from Newcastle, they've already hit the dust and haven't qualified for the final, so it's very intense and very keen.
The tournament will also serve as a warm-up for state.
It certainly will. People that perform well here as a pair will most certainly team up in the big state titles which are coming up later in the year.
Catherine Lamond, NBN News.
An ominous line of cloud approached from the south, stacking up for a charge that would soon send players and fans at the Tooheys Challenge match running for cover. The spectacle was caught on a football telecast and called by commentators Ray Warren and Peter Sterling. The field was abandoned to the swirling tempest while stalwart spectators held their ground. Trees, power lines and TV aerials proved less flexible. Roofing iron took off like a kite from an Adamstown sports store and crashed across the roadway. Panels were punched out of the Beaumont Park dog track grandstand. The course was unscathed and temporary roofing repairs should see tonight's racing program go ahead as planned. Emergency services reported trees uprooted throughout Lake Macquarie and Newcastle suburbs, some falling on houses and cars. But one of the closest calls came from a Central Coast couple whose caravan annex was crushed by a falling gum.
I said to the wife, like, we come out the van into the annex just in case, because I noticed the trees over the back there blowing well, and I said just in case the tree comes down.
Andrew Lobb, NBN News. The 66-year-old biker died instantly when his heavy touring machine crossed to the wrong side of the Pacific Highway and smashed into a car south of Taree. The collision happened on a sweeping downhill bend. 3 women travelling in the car, one of them pregnant, were taken to the Manning Base Hospital with minor injuries. Traffic was delayed as the police accident investigation squad inspected the scene and the wrecked vehicles. The force of the impact was especially apparent on the bike. Its rider was catapulted metres from the crash.
The Osprey Arrow arrived in port late this morning and tied up in the Eastern Basin. On schedule at 3 o'clock, a Maritime Union of Australia team began loading 16,000 tonnes of aluminium as well as lead and timber bound for Japan. Since bans are in place on casual labour and overtime here as elsewhere, the union expected that Australian stevedores would stand the men down, but that didn't happen.
We've attempted to isolate the dispute to Australian stevedores in Sydney. We've been unsuccessful in the majority of ports, but at this stage it appears that we could isolate it here in Newcastle.
So work will go ahead on the Osprey Arrow?
Yeah, as far as we're concerned, we're prepared to go to work with limitations on overtime and the use of casuals.
And what does the company appear to think about that?
Well, at this stage we haven't heard any report back from the company. Their response in other ports has been to issue immediate dismissals to the other employees. Here in Newcastle, work's continuing.
If all continues as normal, the vessel should be ready to sail on Sunday. But the next shift, due to start at midnight, would usually include some casual labour, and it remains to be seen if the company accepts reduced manning. The national industrial dispute is not affecting coal loading in the port.
See if they've got a Stokes in the side of that, please. Stokes.
The top line field included 7 international and 20 state representatives. The inaugural competition began on Sunday and the top 24 teams battled it out today in the final. With such an impressive list of bowlers and more than $6,000 in prize money up for grabs, the standard of play was obviously high.
Excellent. Top under the conditions, because we've had the storm came through here last night. Of rain, but the standard of play has been very good, exceptional.
More than 100 people packed inside and outside the Alder Park Bowling Club for the final day of play. The success of the tournament has guaranteed it will return next year, and it is bound to become one of the biggest events on the Hunter Valley bowling calendar. It was a colourful display at Nabiac Hotel as the mean machines took a rest. To be classed as a street rod car, the American vehicles must be made before 1949 and have modified suspension. The event is organised by Taree Street Rodders and is called Country Cruisin' Nabiac 94. This afternoon the convoy left for Taree. Tomorrow they will have breakfast on the waterfront at Foster, then drive back to Nabiac. Organisers say the hot rods will become a familiar sight on the mid-north coast as they plan to make it an annual event. Jason Neuenhoff, NBN News.
Australia already has national programs to reduce the number of deaths from AIDS and heart disease. Professor John Forbes wants a similar national strategy to fight breast cancer. $30 million, that's the amount Professor Forbes would like to see allocated in the forthcoming federal budget for research, education and treatment. But Health Minister Graham Richardson isn't making any promises. The federal government's budget will be released on the 10th of May.
It's the first time footy boots have ever trampled on. The All Blacks have left the security of Lawn Park, their base since the club was formed, to move to Marcellin Park, just a few kilometres away. The club is leasing the ground and has full control over how the field is prepared and when it's used. It's estimated $40,000 has already been spent backfilling and turfing. Some of the Parramatta players were given no choice but to taste the new turf during today's trials. Maitland have yet to determine the makeup of their top 3 sides, so today swapped all the players around to have a go for 40 minutes a session while the coaches looked on. The unlimited class got away with a clean start, every one of the crews out of the water quickly and settling down to a 100 km/h ride. Ken Broughton's boat Mirage led on the first lap, covering the distance from Belmont Bay to Pulbar Island and back in just 13 minutes. But they were simply outrun by the Sting, skiers Scott Kell and Jamie Crizzano staying upright to finish the 80 kilometres in 41 minutes and 51 seconds.
In conditions like that, you've got to be lucky, and it was like 4 foot waves out there.
Others found the going a bit tougher, the cross-chop throwing their boats around like toys. However, under 10 skiers, Scott Attard and Reece Middlemiss just wanted to get out of the water. For 45 minutes they tried to get up and running. In the end, the cold got the better of them and they just gave up, vowing to try again next race.
An afternoon by the telly and an appreciation for Guy Leach striding over the finish line in the Coolangatta Gold won Marsha Hoffman a brand new Daihatsu Feroza and a Wild Thing watercraft. Marsha wasn't alone in her judgment in the classic catches style competition of surf lifesaving. 10,000 other people voted for the blonde-headed Ironman as well. Leach, along with Sean Kenny and Craig Riddington, was in Newcastle today for the presentation. Car and boat valued at close to $40,000.
Nobody likes paying rates, and the people of Lake Macquarie are facing a new rating system.
We've tried to come up with what we think is a fair and equitable way of trying to spread the load.
Previously, rates have been based solely on land valuations. If the land was pricey, so were the rates. The new system has a flat $185 plus a 65% land value rate added. So next financial year, people with land valued at say $20,000 will save $60 a year. $50,000 blocks will go up $14. At the top end of the range, the saving could be as much as $800 a year. While some might question the cut for the more expensive properties, it's seen as a fairer system by council. Before the real estate boom here at Lake Macquarie, scores of Aussie battlers bought homes right on the water, average wage earners and pensioners. In the past, they've suffered under heavy rates. The new system will give them some breathing space.
There are a lot of suburbs where there were people that were finding it difficult to pay their rates on valuable properties. A lot of pensioners and retired people that have had weekenders and so on.
In all, Lake Macquarie will raise $35 million in rates in the next full financial year. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
$30,000 Australians die of heart attacks each year. The New South Wales Ambulance Service says a basic knowledge of life-saving skills could help cut the statistics. Project Restart was launched this summer and has given hundreds of people the ability to at least try to save lives. The campaign took to Garden City Shopping Centre for a mass demonstration and will conduct another class at the Newcastle show. Instructors supplied 50 easy-to-use mannequins.
You've got all the vital areas clearly defined on here with the ribs and the notch in the top of the sternum there, and it does make it much easier for us to instruct, and especially how we're trying to teach the masses very quickly. These mannequins are real easy.
It seems you're never too young to have a go.
Well, I've got 8 children and 1 grandchild and a swimming pool, and I just think there's a lot of dangers with children.
When I found out this was at the centre, I thought, well, I'll do this to start off with and, go to do a course later on as well.
Susan Arkell, a student from the United States, took a refresher course. Over there, CPR is taught in schools.
Actually, before we can graduate from high school, which is equivalent to your year 12, we are trained in CPR. So if all our teachers are actually trained in CPR before we can graduate. So we just go into a classroom, they teach us CPR, and then we get our certificate.